Hello, welcome back to Andre's Adventures. Today we're going to Los Angeles Zoo. We're walking to get our tickets. And this is our pictures. One with my dad, one with my whole family, one with a silly pose, and one with I have the tickets. And then I saw a seal come by right there. And then it swam on the bottom, and then I went up the stairs. And after we went to the shops, we entered the whole entire zoo where all the animals were. And then we saw flamingos. We saw the flamingos. They were beautiful, and there were a lot of them. And then I went all the way, and then I went to the reptiles exhibit. I saw a lot of reptiles. Not a little, but a lot. And then I took a picture on the big lizard. Here's my picture. And then I entered in. First, I saw a giant day gecko. Next, we saw an Iranian harlequin newt. Next, we saw a rough-scaled python. Next, I saw a temple viper. Next, we saw a green tree python. Next, we saw a mangrove viper. And then there was a vampire crab. That it was so small that I could barely see it. And then we saw an Armenian viper. And then we saw a long-nosed viper sitting on a log. And then we saw a huge bushmaster. Next, we saw a Mangshan pit viper. Next, we saw a gaboon viper. And then we saw a really cute snake sticking its head out of a hole. And then we saw a monitor lizard staring at us. And then we saw a forest dragon and a tree frog. And then we saw a water monitor. Nom nom nom. And then we saw a lance-headed rattlesnake. And then next we saw a Mexican bearded lizard. And we saw a Mexican West Coast rattlesnake. Then we saw a lot of fish. So much fish. And then there was a turtle that swam right by us. And these were all the skulls of the animals there. And then I saw tarantulas, dark tree frogs, so many creatures in those tanks. And then I saw 3 frogs. And then I moved on. And then I saw an iguana. And then I found it in the tree. And then I saw a rattlesnake. And then we saw a San Diego gopher snake and a Southern Pacific rattlesnake. Then we saw a Southwest speckled rattlesnake. And then we saw a sidewinder. And then we saw a Santa Catalina Island rattlesnake. then we saw a snoring giant centipede. And lastly, we saw sunburnt diving beetle. And next, when we walked out, we saw an Indian gharial enclosure. Fish and turtles are swimming with the gharials too. Next, there was an anaconda statue and I wanted to take a picture with it. And then I took a picture of it. And then I was pretending to be asleep in it. Like that. And then I just came out. And then that was my picture. Next we saw western gray kangaroos and then they were just laying down. And then we saw wombats. It was really dark and none of the wombats came out. Next, we saw a huge Komodo dragon. Look how big and strong it is. And then next, we saw a double-wattled cassowary. Next, we saw weaver birds weaving their nests. And then I saw groundhogs. Wait, folks. There's actually Jacoan pecaries. And then we saw sunbutterns, black-necked stilts, buffleheads, and scarlet ibises. Next, we saw a bunch of desert bighorn sheep on a huge rock. And then we saw peninsular pronghorns. And I love them because they have different horns than other animals. And look how cute he looks. And then we saw Grevy's zebra. And then we took a really short break. And then we saw vultures. And then we saw vultures just sitting everywhere. And then we saw gearnuts. Don't they look like antelopes? And next, we saw an Abyssinian ground hornbill. Bill. It was so awesome because it was grabbing leaves. And then we saw giraffes. One was looking at its height. And then another was eating plants. Plantiles. One was right next to a whole ruler, and it was almost 14 feet tall! And then we saw western lowland gorillas in a group, sitting right next to the waterfall. And then we saw chimpanzees! Next, we saw a Sichuan takin. Next, we went into a cute monkey enclosure, and then it had Francois Langers. And right here was a Sumatran tiger. Oh, next we saw a greater one-horned rhino. Next we saw a napping snow leopard, and that's my cousin's favorite animal. Right here, this is an Aldebra tortoise exhibit. And next we saw a mountain tapir. Here are beautiful blue-billed curassows. And next we saw a cute cat called a Brazilian ocelot. And here is a American condor. And then we saw red-bellied piranhas. You should never ever touch it. I'm a piranha. Now I went upstairs and walked. And then I saw cute, really cute otters just sliding down a waterfall. And then I went down. And then I went down a ramp, and then I just ran back. Now we are at the end of the zoo. Thank you for exploring the LA Zoo with me. I hope you will join me again on the next Andre's Adventures. Like and subscribe.